flowing in their veins. Mackie and Judd on SKOR North and SKORNorth.com.
Yeah, overall, I think we played some pretty good baseball this series. I think it's hard to argue with a series win against a first place and a kind of decisively first place team that we just played. Today we didn't get much going on the offensive side, and we didn't pound the zone the way that we needed to, especially towards the beginning of the game. But overall, we'll take this series all day.
And welcome into Talking Twins. That, of course, Rocco Baldelli, manager of the Minnesota Twins. Zolgad back with you. Jake Depew, as always, executive producer, and co-host Declan Goff as well. All right. So for those of you who are still consuming this show, first of all, thank you. You're patient. You're a patient group of people. You're baseball fans. You obviously had high expectations, as did we. And despite the fact that the Twins did win 2 of 3 against the Brewers, you have been let down. But Jake Depew, I want to start here, and it's in reference to a column that Jim Souhan wrote in today's Star Tribune. And I think this was off Rocco's access from yesterday on Zoom, so I don't think it's an exclusive. But nonetheless, Jim did delve into it. And from Rocco Baldelli's standpoint, this is a very interesting thing, Jake, for him to say. And it's going to send us off on a lot of different threads. Because for a manager or a GM or a president of baseball operations to talk about this, I think speaks volumes to the realization of where a franchise is, okay? So during the course of the conversation, Rocco used the word rebuild to describe what the Twins are going to be going through. And then here's the quote off of his use of the word rebuild, according to Souhan's column. Rocco, these type of conversations, they don't throw me off or frustrate me personally in any way. This is the way that you have to rebuild yourself on a regular basis in this game, especially in an organization that does not have the payroll of the Dodgers or the Yankees. Your reaction to the fact that's, to me, that's very much, if you're talking about us being good in 2022, you might want to slow your roll.
Yeah, I agree with him. I'm surprised he said that so openly. I haven't read Souhan's column yet, full disclosure, but I will. But I'm really surprised he acknowledged that. To me, that's reality. When you look at their starting rotation going into 2022, assuming Kenta Maeda has Tommy John on Wednesday, and it's sure looking like that's the case. I know they don't know for sure until they get him into surgery, but let's assume he's out for 2022. Pineda's a free agent. So you have really no established starters coming back in 2022. And so they're going to rely, I think, mostly on prospects and the fact that he brought up payroll. That's interesting too. I'm surprised he said that as well. But that would suggest, they're not going to go sign a big starter in free agency. And of course he doesn't have to bring up payroll for us to know that it's very unlikely they're going to sign, a Max Scherzer type in free agency. So, when I look at the rotation going into 22, it's Bailey Ober, who's done well for sure. And then a number of question marks, who's going to be in that equation? Joe Ryan, probably, Johan Duran, but he's been hurt almost all of this year. Belazovic has been up and down, and he's been hurt. Winder's been hurt. Griffin Jacks and Charlie Barnes have not performed well at the major league level. I know they're rookies and they're still, a chance they could get better. But, I look at their pitching as basically 5 or at least 4 question marks with Ober looking more or less like a lock. They certainly have talent on the position player side. There's no question about that. But between the starting rotation and question marks in the bullpen, it's just hard to see them filling enough gaps, via free agency or via prospects coming up and immediately performing well and being effective to compete for a division title in 22. Could they compete for a wild card, especially if there's expanded playoffs? That's possible. But I think we are looking more at a rebuild than a retool, which is what we've kind of been saying on here for the last few weeks. But of course, that differs from the narrative that we've heard from Falvey in particular over the last few months, which is that it's a retool, not a rebuild. And I think they're starting to realize that, no, this is going to be at least a 2-year rebuild.
How are we to feel about this then, too? And I guess I say this, guys, from multiple different angles. One is these guys who, by the way, for a couple of years did a great job. So, like, I don't think that it's fair, as embarrassing as the playoff loss streak is, I don't think it's fair to just dismiss the fact that you won back-to-back American League Central titles. But how are we to feel about this from the angle of, 2021-22 is supposed to be right in the sweet spot of success. And the lack of success is largely due to, and this is not all bad luck, this is your own decisions, a lack of pitching, and these guys were hired for pitching. How are we to feel about in 2019 when you had a team that set a major league record with 307 home runs, Jake, and you had a really good club? Everything was gelling. And you went out and made, trades for Sam Dyson, who turned out to be a bad guy and a terrible pickup because he was damaged goods. Sergio Romo, who was fine, but certainly not an impact guy. And you basically told us back then, hey, just wait. The window's ajar now, but by 2021 and 22, it's going to be wide open. The frustration in that sense that Twins fans probably feel is genuine, and I think it's deserved. And really, this is tough for me, for any team that's fallen apart in this town, and this team has fallen apart. This is one of the toughest ones for me to process because in some ways it does seem inexcusable.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Twins fans have a right to be frustrated. I think the front office has really dropped the ball. We've talked about this all season, but they dropped the ball in the playoffs, but they really dropped the ball obviously on 2021. This was supposed to be right in the middle of their window, like you said. All of their free agent signings really performed terribly with the Twins. There really isn't a single free agent signing other than Nelson Cruz, and that's a little bit different because he was coming back. But the pitching they brought in has been awful, and they do have a number of good prospects on the pitching side. There's no question, but they haven't brought any of them up to the big league level and seen any success other than Bailey Ober. We're now starting to see that. So, I've said for a long time, I think the goal of this front office is to be consistently competitive, consistently give themselves a chance. And they've, I think, more or less said that. And right now, as we look at, a terrible 2021 and entering a rebuild in 2022, they failed at that task. They weren't competitive in 18. They certainly have not been competitive in 21. And I don't think they're going to be competitive in 22. So I don't blame any fans for being frustrated by the lack of pitching development and the lack of having a consistently solid team, as the front office has said is their goal, So, yeah, I'm on record as saying I would give them one more year to develop these starters. I wouldn't fire them at the end of this year. I would give them one more year. But if these starting pitchers don't come up and perform well in 2022 and really show signs that they're ready, then at that point they'll be 6 years in and they won't really have developed anyone on the starting pitching side. So I think it's kind of make or break time in 2022, not necessarily in terms of competing, because I don't think they're going to compete, but in terms of seeing real development at the major league level with their pitchers.
What does the rotation need to look like then in 22, assuming we start on time? What does the rotation need to look as far as the prospects that we need to see come up, and also what they need to go out and get? Because I'm not sure just saying we're rebuilding now, I'm not sure it works. I get it, but that's a lot of season tickets that you're just going to punt on. Because there's a lot of people coming out of a pandemic in a very competitive and really not that big market for sports and entertainment to just be like, well, it's not working, so hey, it's a redo of 2013 or something like that. When it comes to this staff, this executive staff, Jake, how many of these pitchers do you need to see in the rotation, and how much do you think that they need to go at least get outside help that's, for instance, not named Jay Happ or Homer Bailey or Matt Shoemaker?
They're going to have to get outside help. You can't rely on 5 essentially rookies. I guess Ober will probably have used up his rookie eligibility this year, but basically 5 rookies in the starting rotation. You can't rely on that, and those guys are all going to be on innings limits. We've seen that with Ober this year. He's on an innings limit. I'm sure Duran and Balazovic and Winder and all these guys who have been hurt will be on innings limit. So like you can't count on them to pitch 200 innings or anything close to that in 2022. So they're going to have to go get some innings eaters. But that's not going to be Max Scherzer. It's not going to be these top line starters. It's going to be more of the Michael Pineda level, solid guys around 4 ERA who can give you 150 to 200 innings. So I think they have to sign at least 2 of those types of guys, and then they're just going to filter in all of these prospects if they can actually get healthy. Again, like this is a huge concern. Winder's had arm issues. Duran's had arm issues. Canarino's had arm issues. Belazovic has been injured. So like,
besides that, it's all fine. I mean, quit being negative.
Right. And, I think those guys are good prospects, but like, again, even if they're fully healthy, we can't expect more than probably, 100 to 150 innings from those guys. So it's going to be a group effort in 2022 just to fill enough innings, and they're going to have to get outside help. There's just no question.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, do we think that, so we're pretty sure, in fact, I think he's said this in his Zoom press conference on Saturday, Maeda thinks he's going to have Tommy John, so he's going to miss all of 22. The problem is he's not a kid. So when he comes back then in 2023, possibly, he's going to be what, 30?
35? I think 35. Yeah.
35. So the problem there, and again, this is why you need to try to win when your window is open. Last year you get a really great season. I mean, Maeda was fantastic. He's finished in second place in the Cy Young voting. To Bieber, he's absolutely great. And again, you're not aggressive enough when it really counts to say, let's take our shot. And right now, I think that's sort of, if we had to do an epitaph on Falvey and Levine and these twins, that's sort of the thing on their gravestone is that, 2019, we just all assumed, oh, yeah, they're right. It's going to be great for years to come. And then last year, oh, yeah, it's going to be fine. And now you say to yourself, okay, this thing might take another year or two, or, for sure, if they're talking about a rebuild 2 years. So it's just so interesting to me that they haven't and didn't go in and capitalize and say, at the very least, we're really going to try to win a damn playoff series.
And unfortunately, that's where they're very similar to, I think, the Terry Ryan and Bill Smith regimes, that both of those guys had consistently competitive teams for the most part. There were obviously some dark days in between 2011 and 17. But they did well. They made the playoffs a lot, but they never went all in, whether it's like not trading for Cliff Lee back in 2010 or whatever. There are a number of examples of them just not going all in. And we're seeing the same thing with Falvey and Levine. They're very different in their approaches and their use of analytics and things like that. But that is a similarity. And 19 was a huge missed opportunity to do that. And we've hit them for that. But to not get a starter at the deadline, even if you didn't know that Pineda was going to be suspended, I believe he was under the appeals he was in the appeals process.
He was. He was. You're correct.
And I don't know if they knew about that or not. I know that the front office, I don't believe they're necessarily informed about that. I think it would be up to the player to tell them. But still, even if you thought Pineda was there for the playoffs, I don't think a rotation in 19 of Barrios, Odorizzi, and Pineda is good enough to bring you to a World Series. I think that's a fine rotation. That's solid. But I still think if you really want to make a World Series run, you need to go out and get a horse, an ace, or somebody close to that level. So their failure to not only not get an ace, but not get any starter at all, it was a big miss. I mean, that was a historically good offense. They won 101 games. And it's a lesson for them that when you have a shot, you have to go all in. And if you look at the way that a lot of these teams have acted that have won the World Series or gone to World Series, they have gone all in at the deadline. They have traded for that, for the Astros trading for Garrett Cole or Greinke or whatever. I think that's the move. And of course it's risky, or the Cubs trading for Aroldis Chapman, for example, and giving up Gleyber Torres, I believe. It's a risky move, but at some point you have to put your chips in. And we haven't seen that with this organization over the last 2 decades, really, over multiple front offices. And it is, in my opinion, a mistake. At some point you have to really go for it. They're just not doing that.
Yeah, in 2019, I think if you look at the 2 guys that they probably should, and were realistic targets and targets they should have went after, were Marcus Stroman and Robbie Ray. And Robbie Ray has turned into a very nice pitcher in Toronto. I believe he is a UFA at the end of this year, so he'll be a free agent. Marcus Stroman, same situation. But even just to put Stroman or put Robbie Ray as the number 2 going into that Yankees series, it could have changed the entire dynamic of how it goes. And you were afraid to do that because you probably didn't want to give up Brent Rooker. You probably were afraid to give up Balazovic. You were afraid to basically give up on something. And now the window to get back into contention is 2 years from now, probably at best. So it's a frustrating part of this regime because in this offseason, this winter, to Jake's point earlier, they're probably going to go after the Danny Duffys of the world, like James Paxton, guys who probably are more part of a rebuilding phase than they are moving the needle into getting you excited for the 2022 season. Are they innings eaters and are they, average quality starting pitching? Yes. But they're not going to do anything that makes you think, oh, here comes 85 wins and flirting with a wild card, or oh, here we go, and we're going to be right up there at the White Sox. Like, it's basically a holding pattern, and from a business standpoint, I get that, but it's frustrating when you go back to 19 and 20 when that window was right there, and you were scared to give up on Brent Rooker, and now here we are entering most likely another rebuilding phase.
The frustrating thing too about this entire conversation is this, and I feel like this extends back to Terry as well, but it's exactly right. What frustrates me is the fact that this team in the last, 20 years plus always has an excuse. Mm-hmm. The first one is, we went out and got Donaldson, but, when it comes to Wheeler, we made him a good offer, but he wanted to be in Philadelphia, and they made him a better offer, and we can't match that. And in Baldelli's comment in Souhan's column, he says it again. When you're dealing with teams like the Yankees and Dodgers, it's tough to compete because they can spend more, which is very true, but that's excuse one. Okay, I'm almost willing to give you that one because those teams have the ability to spend irresponsibly, and often if it doesn't work, they're just like, hey, dude, go home, sit on your couch, we'll pay you. We've got a guy who's going to replace you. The Minnesota Twins and a lot of teams don't have that. But here's where I get really frustrated and there's no excuse. And this tracks back to 19 and to a certain degree last year. There is no excuse for not making a deal at the deadline if you can put yourself over the top or give yourself that chance. The Minnesota Twins are built to do that. They are built to make trades at the deadline to improve themselves and maybe even get a pending free agent who's going to walk. But guess what? If you get to a World Series and win it, no one's going to give a damn. And I will point to, and this is the thing that, in my opinion, the best GM of the Twins in their history, Andy McPhail, was willing to do. If you go back to the Twins team that won the World Series, look at the moves that team had made. They made a lot of moves. They acquired Jeff Reardon from the Expos. Go back and look at that trade, and I don't know if back then they ranked prospects like they do now, but they traded a catcher by the name of Jeff Reed. Jeff Reed was a top prospect catcher. But you know what the Twins didn't have? A good closer. They traded in 86, and I forget if this is pre-McPhail or right around that time. In 86, they traded a shortstop by the name of Jay Bell, one of the top prospects in baseball, to Cleveland in the Blyleven deal. Why? They needed starting pitching help. So the Twins have done this, but they are built to make those type of trades to try and maximize on what they consider to be rosters that are ready to pop. I don't think they ever have the luxury of doing, in retrospect, what Thad Levine said in 2019, which is the window's ajar and we'll know when it's open. You don't have that. 2019, throw the window open. Don't let it open by itself. And so that's far more frustrating to me than the free agent signings, because that I almost sort of get. But when you have that 2019 team and you come back and say, here's Sam Dyson and Sergio Romo, okay, that doesn't work for me. And that's where it's frustrating, and that's where I feel like, again, we're ending up in the same place that we did with the previous regime now of, you guys, they won 2 or 3 against the Brewers. But here are your starting pitchers. Andrew Albers, who was here in 2013 and 16 and was very much part of the dreck of those Twins teams. Charlie Barnes, who I'm not quite sure belongs here ever. And Griffin Jacks, who is the guy that lost and got hit hard. The Twins brought in a reliever. I don't know his name, and I'm proud of this. Late in yesterday's game, who I've never heard of in my life, another guy that they just called up, another slappy that they just called up. So this is where you need to capitalize when the opportunity presents itself and not give me the window will fly open by itself like magic. No, it won't. You throw it open. You had a chance to, and because you didn't now, we're looking at this team and lamenting, rightfully so, 2019.
Yeah, and if you look at the Rays, so the Rays are in obviously even worse financial situation than the Twins, for sure. They understand that they have a legitimate shot to win the World Series this year. And what did they do? They traded for Nelson Cruz. They gave up Joe Ryan, a very good pitching prospect, and Drew Strotman, a solid pitching prospect, to get Nelson Cruz because they needed a DH, right? Like they needed a DH the way these Twins teams have needed pitching. And they went out and got him, and they're paying the rest of his salary for this year, even though, their payroll is tiny. So that's a big hit for them, but they understand that that's what they need to get over that hump. Now, to be fair to the Twins, they did trade for Kenta Maeda in the offseason of 2020. So they did understand that to some extent. They obviously failed in 2019, but they did trade for Maeda. The problem is they didn't use Maeda in the playoffs the way he should have been used. They pulled him after like 80 pitches, and they pulled Barrios after 80 pitches when both of those guys were pitching well. So it's like, if you're going to trade for those guys, or if you have a Barrios, then use him, especially when they're pitching well. So not only did they, not get the help they need, certainly in 19, they did get some help in 20, but then when you combine that with pulling these guys early in the playoffs, it's just not a good look. So yeah, I mean, again, the Rays, if the Rays do it, then the Twins can do it, because the Rays payroll is tiny, right? So yeah, it's a missed opportunity. It's a big one. And now we're looking at a rebuild. Yeah.
And I think the frustrating part, maybe some Twins fans think, what are you talking about? They have pulled off successful trades before, like the Shannon Stewart trade, a great trade, right? Like it ended up being an MVP finalist basically over the last 3 months of the season. Getting Orlando Cabrera in 2009 to be like, oh, that nice little supplemental shortstop that gives you a little spark and edge to give you a push run. I don't think any of us are referencing those trades. You can make those trades. Those trades are also kind of a luck of a draw that you didn't think that it would come up to this 100th percentile. I'm talking about a trade that at the moment that puts your franchise over the top long term and with championship aspirations. Right. Not looking for the cute plug and play and the fun little deadline move that barely moves the needle. No, a legitimate trade offer to go get, I'm just spitballing, Justin Verlander 3 years ago or 4 years ago, like an actual legitimate trade scheme that puts your team in the ballpark of a team like the Dodgers or like the Yankees just once. You're talking about trading, and look, in 19, this would have made sense. You are talking about potentially trading Royce Lewis, because that's going to get you an ace. And the problem is he's still not here. He's hurt constantly, and he might be great someday. I don't know, but he ain't a kid now, right? Hoarding top prospects is often probably smart. But Dex, to what you're saying, in 19, if you could have gone and gotten that ace, and again, it might have been a pending free agent who walked. But, if you take a shot, a lot of people are going to say, I applaud that. So I'm with you, and I totally get what you're saying. We're not talking about nice little trades where, Shannon Stewart, unbelievable. I can't believe that. That was fun. We're talking about, oh my God, what did you just do? Like, do you think also like Royals fans who were dormant in the basement of the AL Central for 13, 12 years, and then all of a sudden they literally mortgaged the entire farm to go get Cueto and basically bolster their entire World Series odds, and now once again, they're going to be bad again. They've been bad for 4 years now, and they're going to be bad for a decade afterwards, and I would bet 99.99% of those Royals fans would say, worth it every single time.
Absolutely. Oh, I completely agree. I would much rather be in that Royals fan base where, yes, they're consistently bad, but then they totally went for it, as Dex said. They got to 2 World Series, they won one of them. To me, that's much preferable in terms of front office, the moves that they make, than just kind of always being, kind of right there but never going all in. I think if you look at the teams that won the World Series over the last, 2 decades, I could go back and look at this for next week or whatever. I would guess almost all of them made a big time acquisition at the trade deadline, to get that arm that pushes them over the top. There aren't many teams that just make these minor trades and go on a run. I think if you really want to get to a World Series and win a World Series, you have to take more risks than the Twins have. And again, as you guys are saying, like, we went through 19 and 20. They didn't win a single playoff game, and now the window is closed. So, like, all this prospect hoarding, was it really worth it? No. I don't think it was. I'd rather see you go for it and fail than just never go for it and consistently, be kind of in that 85 to 90 win range.
And you might always be or often competitive, but if you're the Twins, you are not always going to be in the mix for a championship. Like, you're just not.
No.
And when Rocco says we can't compete financially with the Yankees and Dodgers, that's an acknowledgement of, hey, sometimes it's not going to work. We can debate that, but the reality is when you are presented, and I don't care if it's Derek Falvey or Terry Ryan or Andy McPhail, when you're presented with the opportunity that this team was for 2 years, you can't just be like, okay, we've turned the corner of success and now every year is going to be special. I mean, we know that's not how sports work now. They might have at one time. You know what? In the old days in baseball, when you didn't have free agency and guys were tied to teams, and Harmon Killebrew was going to be here forever, it was a different story. But with the way that baseball now works and the financial pitfalls and issues of the sport, if you're the Twins and you get good, you got to pounce on that puppy. You got to be like, okay, we're good. How do we win in the playoffs? How do we get to a World Series? And Declan's Kansas City point's perfect. Like, that's you. You might not like it, but that's you. That's the reality that you're going to be, that when you hit that sweet spot of our prospects are maturing and starting to come up, but they're not going to get it done by themselves, right? Think about this. How would we all feel right now if just to pick a year, the 2015 Twins had won a World Series and the team is currently where it is right now?
Oh,
How would we all feel?
I'd feel great.
I'd be fine. Yeah, I'd be fine.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
Because where you don't want to be is stuck in that middle. That's the worst place to be in almost any professional sport. Maybe hockey's an exception because there's a lot of randomness in the playoffs. You guys would know that better than I would, but
not really. No, you're right.
Yeah. Certainly
in
baseball for sure. You either want to be one of those teams that's really got a shot, or you want to be stripping it all down and rebuilding. And the Twins, I think, have consistently been in that middle phase way too often. You either got to go for it or you got to strip it all down. Look at Detroit and Cleveland, 2 teams in their division. They had runs where they went to World Series. They were consistently making the playoffs, and now they're stripping it down and rebuilding, right? But they got there. I mean, Cleveland was 1 game away from winning a World Series. Detroit went to a World Series and a couple of ALCSs. Like, I think that's a much better mold than what the Twins have done over these last 2 decades.
Absolutely. All right, last thing, sir. Byron Buxton is back. What's your expectation?
My expectation is that he will continue to be the Byron Buxton we saw in April. I know he had a tough first series against Milwaukee. I'm not overly concerned about that. We got to give him a little time to adjust. But I think if he stays healthy, he'll start producing the way he did in April. I think if you're a Twins fan, you want to tune into every Buxton at bat that you can for the rest of the season, because I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think there's a pretty good chance that they're going to move him because I think, he only has 1 year left on his deal. And if they see this as a rebuild now and they don't want to commit $100 million or more to him, then they're going to trade him for more prospects. And that would be massively disappointing, but that's what I think is going to happen.
Okay. Let's just say that happens. How do you guys feel on the day he's traded? Declan?
I'd be pretty bummed. I think that would also, and you know what? I would like to know what the return is. Like, if it's a legitimate piece that is coming back right now, okay, I might be not as upset, but I'd be disappointed. I think that would be the cherry on top of the disappointment of this regime. That would signify that we are punting and we're going to be entering a 3 to 4 year rebuild.
Jake?
I agree with what Dex said completely. I would be really disappointed, again, unless you get back a major league piece. If they trade him for a legit starter, then maybe that's a little bit different. But I still commit to Buxton, and I know it's risky. It is super risky to commit to Buxton. But to go back to our earlier conversation, at some point you have to take big risks. And I think even if you're not going to compete in 22, you want Buxton around for 23, 24, and 25 when you are going to compete, because he's such a talented, dynamic player. At some point, I think he will stay healthy over a full season and play 120, 130 games and be available in October. And if that doesn't happen, then you took a risk and it didn't pay off. But I'd rather take that risk and commit to a generational talent like Buxton than to trade him for prospects.
Great stuff, sir. We'll talk to you next week, Jake Depew. Declan, thank you very much. Talking Twins. And again, if you are still watching and you made it to the end, thank you. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you later.